Good evening. On Election Day, October 10th, 2007, Ontario voters will decide in a referendum whether to accept the recommendation of the Ontario Citizens' Assembly on electoral reform. The Assembly recommends that Ontario adopt a new mixed-member proportional voting system. Joining us this evening is Billy Ballot, an expert on voting systems. Thank you for joining us, Billy.
Thanks, Nina. Voting is a very important part of our democracy, so it's my pleasure to be here.
Okay, Billy. Before we get to the Assembly's recommendation, why don't you give us some background?
Good idea. The provincial government asked the Citizens' Assembly to look at Ontario's electoral system, the way votes are translated into seats in the legislature, and to recommend whether we should keep our current system or adopt a different one. The Assembly was made up of 103 citizens, selected at random, one from each of Ontario's ridings. They worked independently of government and political parties. They spent 8 months learning about electoral systems, consulting with the public, and discussing the values they felt Ontario's voting system should reflect, before coming to a group decision. The Assembly recommended that Ontario should change from its current system, single-member plurality, to a new mixed-member proportional system that it designed to meet the specific needs of Ontario.
So, this new voting system was developed and recommended by citizens, not politicians. But if the Assembly did all this work, why are we having a referendum?
Good question, Nina. The referendum is an opportunity for all Ontario voters to have a say in whether or not Ontario should adopt the new system. When voters head to the polls on Election Day, they'll also get to vote on the referendum.
That makes sense. What can you tell us about how the mixed-member proportional system works?
Well, Nina, perhaps the most interesting thing about the new system is the ballot. As you can see from my new MMP suit, you have 2 votes on a single ballot. On one side of the ballot, you select the party of your choice. This vote determines the total share of seats each party gets in the legislature. On the other side of the ballot, you select the candidate of your choice. This vote elects a local candidate to represent your riding, just like in our current system. You can even vote for a local candidate from a different party if you want.
All right, so voters cast 2 votes, one for a party and one for a local candidate. But how do the 2 votes work together?
That's a good question. As I said, the party vote determines how many seats each party receives in the legislature. Say a party wins 35% of the party vote. It receives roughly 35% of the seats in the legislature. The election results are proportional.
What happens next?
I think it would help if we look at the results of an imaginary election. Suppose Party A is entitled to 55 seats based on its share of the party vote. First, Party A gets all the local seats it's won. In this example, Party A had 50 local candidates elected in ridings. Then, if it still has seats to fill, it's allocated list seats. In our imaginary election, Party A is entitled to 55 seats, but it elected only 50 local candidates. It gets a top-up of 5 list seats to bring its total number of seats in the legislature up to 55. The same process is used for all the other parties. This way, each party's share of seats is equal to the share of votes it received in the election.
Okay, Billy, I think I understand your example. A party gets all the local seats it has won. Then, if it doesn't have its total share of seats, it gets list seats to make up the difference. But I'm not sure I understand what a list seat is.
Well, Nina, each party nominates a province-wide list of candidates in the order it wants them to be elected. Before the election, parties must submit their lists and the details of how they develop them with Elections Ontario, a neutral body. Elections Ontario will publish this information widely, so you'll know who's on the list before you vote for a party. You'll see whether a party's list includes a good balance of men and women, people from your region, and candidates who reflect Ontario's diverse population. You'll also be able to assess whether a party created its list in a fair and open way. If you're unhappy with a party's performance or its list members, you can withdraw your support for that party at the next election.
Okay, that makes sense. But how many local members and how many list members will there be?
In the new system, there are 129 seats in the legislature. 90 of the seats are held by local members. 39 of the seats are held by list members elected province-wide. That's 70% elected locally and 30% elected province-wide. While the local members and list members are elected in different ways, they all work together to represent all Ontarians.
All right, Billy. I think we have a good sense now of how the system works. What happens after the election? In our current system, we usually have single-party majority governments. But from what I understand, that is unlikely under the new system. Is that right?
That's right, Nina. A mixed-member proportional system reflects the belief that a party should only be able to form a majority government on its own only when it receives a majority or close to a majority of the votes. But that hasn't happened in Ontario since 1937.
Then what types of governments are likely?
That's an interesting question, Nina. Based on other countries that use a mixed member proportional system, we know that they usually produce coalition majority governments. These are governments made up of two or more parties that together hold a majority of the seats. These parties enter into a formal agreement to work together and share power.
Billy, this has been really interesting, but we're running out of time. Thanks for joining us this evening. I'm sure our viewers have a much better sense of how a mixed member proportional system works and what the referendum is all about.
Thank you, Nina.
And that concludes our program for this evening. If you'd like more information on this topic, visit the Citizens Assembly website at www.citizensassembly.gov.on.ca. Thank you and good evening.